in history, but just, well, this is not standing good. Can you see it? Before I start, I would like to tell a few words about the International Women's Day. And I'm sorry, because somewhere in the room there is a wireless connection, so this stupid small white thing is coming each few minutes, and I'm really apologizing for it. So, the International Women's Day is the story of ordinary women as makers of history. It is rooted in the century-old struggle of women to participate in society on an equal footing with men. When women on all continents, often divided by national boundaries and by ethnic, linguistic, cultural, economic and political differences, come together to celebrate their day, they can look back to a tradition that represents almost 100 years of struggle for equality, justice, peace and development. So to recall a few milestones from this struggle, here are some facts. First, we have two pictures of two ladies. One is Lucy Burns. She was an American suffragette and women's rights advocate. She was a close friend of Alice Paul, and together they formed the National Women's Party. The second woman is Susan B. Anthony, American civil rights leader and a co-founder of the National Women's Suffragette Association. And here you have a picture took in 1970 of the National Women's Party members in front of the White House in a protest. So, one of the first protests in history took place on March the 8th in 1857, when women from clothing and textile factories organized in New York City their first protest. A few years later, or 50 almost years later, on March the 8th, 15,000 women marched through New York City demanding shorter hours, better pay and voting rights. In 1910, an international women's conference in Copenhagen set an International Women's Day, was established. Unfortunately, another tragic situation put the problems of work condition women were working really in the center. And this was the tragic Triangle Fire in New York City on March 25th, 1911. This fire took lives of more than 150 working women. This event had a significant impact on labor legislation. The two big wars, especially the Second World War, introduced a new role of women in modern society. As a result of that, in 1945, the chapter of the United Nations proclaimed for the first time the gender equality as a fundamental human right. And finally, in 1975, the United Nations gave official sanction and began sponsoring the International Women's Day. So the International Women's Day is marked on March 8th every year. It is a major day of global celebration for the economical, political and social achievements of women. In honor of the last week's holiday, I would like to present to you famous Croatian women through history. This selection I just prepared for you of women is absolutely personal, so I wouldn't say this is all of them or the best, it's just my personal choice. And it will be presented chronologically according to their year of birth. So I would like to start with the first one, Cvjeta Zuzorić. She is born in Dubrovnik around 1552, and her father was a merchant, and while she was still a child, the family moved to Italy, Ancona. There she got an excellent education and later met and married a wealthy Florentine nobleman, Bartolomeo Peschioni. The couple moved to Florence, and in their palace in Florence, Cvjeta met the most famous humanist writers and poets of that time. Cvjeta, who became famous for her beauty, also wrote poems, but none survived the centuries. On the contrary, we know about her through work of other poets and painters. Even the famous Italian poet Torquato Tasso wrote 3 sonnets in honor to Cvjeta. After a year, her husband became the Florentine consul to Dubrovnik, so Cvjeta returned after years and years to her hometown. Cvjeta brought with her to Dubrovnik a cosmopolitan flavor, an emancipated behavior, the Renaissance spirit, and immediately became a legend. In Dubrovnik, the couple lived for 15 years. During her husband's long journey, she spent a lot of time in her friend's home in Trsteno. Unfortunately, her husband's business, as well as his health, started to decay, so the family decided to return to Italy. There, we lost trace of her, but we know that Zwieta died of old age in Ancona and was buried in the church San Francesco ad Alto. Her gravestone was later moved, so today her grave is unknown. The second one is Anna Katarina Zrinski-Frankopan. Unfortunately, I didn't have a photo of her. She was a novelist, patron of arts, and patriot. Katarina was probably born in Basiljevo in 1625 into the famous Croatian noble family Frankopan. She was the sister of Krsto Frankopan. In 1641, she married a descendant of another famous Croatian noble family, Petar Zrinski, with whom she had 4 children. She became well known for her writing and poetry. Some of her poems were recently found and printed under the title The Heaven of Soul. Her most famous book is The Traveler Friend. The book is a collection of daily prayers translated from German. The title arises from the Middle Age idea that a human life on earth is just a voyage. In 1670, her brother and husband organized a rebellion against the Austrian crown. Unfortunately, they weren't powerful enough, the conspiracy was revealed, and they were convicted and executed in Wiener Neustadt. Following the collapse of the Zrinsko-Frankopan rebellion, Katarina fell into disfavor with the Vienna court and was forced into seclusion in a monastery in Graz, where she remained until her death on November 16, 1673. Dobrila Vituri, this is more a love story of Miljenko and Dobrila, and this story is almost as beautiful as the love story of Romeo and Juliet. In the second half of the 17th century, the noble family of Vituri at Kastel Lukšić, it's a small town next to Split, had a daughter called Dobrila, and nobleman Rosani, or Croatian variation is Rušinić, had a son Miljenko. These 2 youngsters fell in love but couldn't meet each other because of the enmity of their families. When the parents became aware of the children's love, they put Dobrila under a strict surveillance and sent Miljenko to Venice. Those 2 houses are still there, so if you visit Kastel Lukšić, you can still see the residence of this 2 family. Out of spite, Dobrila's father arranged his daughter's marriage to an older nobleman from Trogir. Informed of this, Miljenko returned on the day of the marriage, and at the most solemn moment of the marriage ceremony, prevented it to take place. To punish her, her father, Dobrila's father, decided to put her into a convent at Trogir, and Miljenko tried to hinder this by sword. The court thereupon banished Miljenko to the monastery on a little island of Visovac at the river Krka. This is not far from Šibenik, where he met Dobrila's nurse and through her sent a message to his beloved to escape from the convent, which she did. After receiving the news of Dobrila's escape, their parents were reconciled and sent messengers to Visovac to bring back the unrepentant lovers to Kastel Lukšić for a solemn marriage ceremony. The lovers obeyed, but on the summer evening in August 1690, after the marriage and feast have taken place, Dobrila's father, out of revenge, killed Miljenko on a drawbridge in front of his castle. In her deep sorrow, Dobrila became ill and died. Her last wish was to be buried with Miljenko in the same grave in the small church St. John's, where one can still today read the inscription over their grave, "Peace to the lovers." This true story inspired 3 works of art, a novel, a play, and an opera. Countess Sindonia Rubido Erdődy was Croatia's first opera prima donna and an important member of the Illyrian movement. Illyrian movement was a national movement in the 19th century. She turned down an offer from the Vienna Opera House to become a professional opera singer because at that time it was not considered to be a respectable profession for a noble woman. Nevertheless, she continued to sing in Zagreb on various occasions, always in accordance with the Illyrian movement. So in 1846, she sang the only female role in the first Croatian opera, Love and Malice, by Vatroslav Lisinski. And in 1858, she was the first to sing the Croatian anthem from her castle. She is the only woman among the famous Illyrians on the ceremonial curtain of the Croatian Reformation. This ceremonial curtain, the Croatian Reformation, is the work of Vlaho Bukovac, painted for the opening of the new theater building in 1895. If you are very lucky and you go to the Croatian National Theater and some special occasion, you can still see, not the original, it's not the original, it's in the museum, but the copy of it. Milka Trnila was an internationally acclaimed Croatian soprano. She studied singing in Zagreb and Vienna and performed all over Europe and States. She was the first Tosca in London and in New York. On July 12, 1900, she was singing the title role of Giacomo Puccini's Tosca at its premiere at the Royal Opera House in London. Puccini was in the audience and joined her on a stage for curtain call, later declaring that no other Tosca has ever approached Trnila's. The American premiere of Tosca was at the Met on February 4, 1901. At this time, leading opera singers traveled with a trunk of costumes. Trnila costumes were an integral part of her approach to each role, and she took a keen interest in their design and creation. Here you have some of the costumes today in the City Museum of Zagreb. In 1900, she commissioned British artist and costume designer Percy Anderson to design costumes for a range of roles. Those costumes here, Kundry for Percival, were made for Trnila's performance in New York in 1903. The drawings, the sketches are still also in City Museum Zagreb. Maria Jurić Zagorka was the first woman reporter and writer. She wrote for the newspaper Obzor, which would be Horizont, but she wrote, of course, under a pseudonym. There's also a story, they said she got a special small room because it was impossible for a lady to work in a newspaper those days, so when visitors entered the newspaper offices, they wouldn't see her. So she was actually hidden in a small room. Bishop Strossmayer, who was a huge cultural mecena, persuaded her to write novels. Zagorka, as a real reporter, undertook research work and, so said the legend, found documents according to which the last execution of witches in Europe took place in Zagreb. From this plot, Zagorka wrote her most famous historical novel, Grička vještica, or the English translation, The Witch from Grič. Grič is the upper town, the old town in Zagreb. The novel immediately became the most lovable and popular piece of literature. Generation and generation of Croatian youth rise with Contessa Nera and her love, the brave Lieutenant Siniša. In 1918, the novel was adapted for the theater play, and in 1920, Zagorka wrote a scenario for a movie. The novel was also published as a comic strip, and it was illustrated by the most famous Croatian illustrator, Maurović. Ivana Brlić-Mažuranić ranks among the top Croatian writers. In Croatia, as well as internationally, she is praised as the best Croatian writer for children. Her grandfather was the famous politician, the Croatian Ban, and poet Ivan Mažuranić. Upon marriage to Vatroslav Brlić, she moved to Brod na Savi, this is today Slavonski Brod, where she lived there for most of her life. She devoted all her work to her family and education. As the mother of 6, she had the ability to identify with the psyche of the child, to understand the purity and naivety of their world. Ivana Brlić-Mažuranić started writing poetry, diaries and essays rather early, but her work were not published until the beginning of the 20th century. In 1913, she published The Marvelous Adventures and Misadventures of Hlapić the Apprentice. And in 1960, the book Tales of Long Ago, which are considered by the critics to be the most valuable. All contents, as well as the character's name, are from the Slavic mythology of the people of Slavonia and Croatia. Here are some of most famous illustrations by Vladimir Kirin. If you remember, he had recently his big exhibition in Klovićevi Dvori, and those illustrations are the famous I think they are made somewhere in the 30s, for her book Tales from Long Ago. With this book, the lost world of the pre-Christian Croatian beliefs was brought to life once again in the form of fairy tale. Her book of novels and fairy tales for children, originally intended to educate her own, have been translated into nearly all European languages. Highly regarded and valued by both national and foreign critics, she obtained the title of Croatian Andersen. Slava Raškaj was born deaf and dumb. She got her education in the school for deaf in Vienna. After the return to her hometown, Ozaj, her teacher realizes Slava's great talent and grants her the opportunity to study painting with the famous Croatian painter Bela Čikoš Sesija. Here is a painting, watercolor on paper, which were made together, her and Bela. She studied with him for a few years and had a couple of exhibitions. Unfortunately, she was very young when she got mentally ill and was put into an institution. After almost 4 years in the institution, she passed away at the age of 29. Dora Pejačević was the first Croatian female composer. Dora Pejačević was a daughter of an excellent Croatian pianist and singer Lila Pejačević, who gave her her first music lessons. We will hear a few maybe notes of her and then I will continue. So it's just to make you curious to hear more. Dora began to compose when she was only 12. She studied music in Zagreb, Dresden and Munich. Although she led a lonely life, as you saw in her castle in Našice and in Europe, she met many eminent musicians and writers and was a friend of an Austrian journalist and writer Karl Kraus. She married Otto Lumbe in 1921 and lived with him in Munich until her sudden death in 23. She was age, I think, 36. She left behind a rich opus of 58 pieces in a late romantic style, mostly for piano or chamber orchestra. Most of it has not been published or recorded yet. Vera Nikolić-Podrinska was born into a wealthy noble family and had the opportunity of an excellent private education. She studied painting with the famous Croatian painter Oton Iveković. She traveled a lot. From one of these travels, she wrote and published a book called From Zagreb to Bangkok. All her life she was involved in the humanitarian work. Another painter, Cata Dujšin Ribar, studied painting in the Royal School of Art in Zagreb and with famous Croatian painters Vidović and Bečić. She spent some time in Paris and London for special studies. Her work was exhibited in London, New York, Washington, Venice, and of course in Zagreb. She was married twice. First time to one of the most famous Croatian actors, Dubravko Dujšin, and after his death to the politician, Dr. Ivan Ribar, the first president of the Communist Parliament after the Second World War. This painting of him is made by Cata, and a few years ago it was stolen and for the moment is missing. We don't know where it is. She was not only a painter but also a writer. She wrote poetry and published 3 books of poetry. In 1978 she donated her entire work of art to her hometown Trogir, so today you can visit the Trogir City Museum at the Cata Dujšin Ribar Gallery. Zinka Kunc-Milanov was a Croatian opera singer, and she was born in Zagreb and studied with the famous Milka Trnina we mentioned just before. She performed in Zagreb and Ljubljana. Later she became a member of the New German Theatre in Prague. She was discovered by Bruno Walter, who recommended her to the famous conductor Arturo Toscanini for a performance of Verdi's Requiem in Salzburg. In 1937, she made her debut at the Metropolitan Opera as Leonora in Giuseppe Verdi's Il Trovatore. At that time, she adopted the name Milano, which was the stage name of her second husband, an actor. In 1947, Milanov left the Met when she married for the third time Yugoslav general and diplomat Ljubomir Ilić and returned to live in her native country for several years. At that time, Zinka reportedly shared a romantic relationship with Yugoslav leader Josip Broz Tito. She was in her mid-40s while he was over 60 when they started the affair. The affair didn't last long, and actually after this affair, Tito married his last wife, Joanka. When Rudolf Pink took over the Metropolitan Opera in 1951, that very same year, Milanov returned and was hailed as a prima donna assoluta, la regina della casa, which means the queen of the house. The Metropolitan career, born in December 1937, grew into one of the most illustrious in the company's long history, not ending until April 16 in 1966, the night the old opera house at Broadway and 39th Street was closed. In between, Milanov provided plenty of sensations and enjoyed many triumphs earned by hard work and sacrifice, wholly fulfilling the promise of a glorious gift. This sentence comes from her biography. And last but not least, Mia Chorak-Slavenska, a dancer since the age of 4, she became the prima ballerina with the Zagreb Opera. She left Zagreb for Vienna and Paris. In France, she started working on film. For many years, she was the leading ballerina of the famous Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, and with whom she moved to the United States in 1940. Her own company, Ballet Variante, was formed in 1944 in Hollywood. Her greatest roles she achieved with the Slavenska Franklin Ballet Company that she founded with Frederick Franklin in the 1950s. One of her most highly regarded roles was a strongly dramatic Blanche Dubois in Valerie Betty's modern choreography of A Streetcar Named Desire, premiered in Her Majesty Royal Theatre in Montreal in 1952. Tennessee Williams later said that no one was such a great Blanche Dubois as Slavenska. Tizian-haired, fiery Slavenska appeared for 2 seasons at the Metropolitan Opera. She was the greatest Croatian ballerina of all times and one of the most influential artists. She performed in the United States, South America, Asia, and Africa. She opened the ballet studio in New York in the 60s, and after retiring from dancing, Slavenska taught at the UCLA and the California Institute of the Arts. So this is my selection. This is not all, but it's my favorites. Thank you very much.